The sound of breaking glass pierced the night as Felicity Kincaid dropped to her knees, gathering the shattered remains of her late father's prized whiskey tumbler. 3 months in Willow Creek, and still the nightmares followed her like loyal hounds. She glanced over her shoulder at nothing, a habit that had earned her curious stares from the townsfolk who already viewed the new schoolteacher with suspicion. The shadows weren't there, not really, but the feeling of being watched never left her. The year was 1878, and the Wyoming Territory was no place for a woman alone. Yet here she was, 22 years old, and running from ghosts that existed only in her mind. "Miss Kincaid," a small voice called from the doorway of the one-room schoolhouse. "Ma says to remind you about supper tonight." Felicity straightened, smoothing her simple blue dress. "Thank you, Mary. Please tell your mother I'll be there shortly." After the child scampered away, Felicity gathered her teaching materials. 6 months ago, she'd been teaching at a prestigious girls' school in Boston. Now she found herself in a frontier town where half her students couldn't write their names and the other half rarely attended because of farm duties. But Willow Creek was as far west as her savings could take her, and distance was what she needed most. The walk to the Hendersons' home took her past the busy saloon. Felicity quickened her pace as boisterous laughter spilled onto the street. A group of cowboys stood outside, their voices carrying in the evening air. She kept her eyes forward, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Evenin', madam," a deep voice called, causing her to nearly stumble. Felicity didn't respond. She never did. Engagement led to questions, and questions led to the past. The past was precisely what she'd ridden 2,000 miles to escape. Sheriff Samuel Wade watched the schoolteacher hurry past the saloon like a startled doe. In the 3 months since her arrival, he'd exchanged perhaps 10 words with the woman. She was a mystery that half the town had already filled with wild speculation. Some said she was a widow. Others whispered about a scandal back east. The more imaginative claimed she'd escaped from an asylum. Sam knew better than to listen to gossip. In his 7 years as sheriff of Willow Creek, he'd learned that folks needed little encouragement to spin tales. Still, there was something about Felicity Kincaid that made him curious. It wasn't just her refined beauty, though the honey-brown hair and eyes the color of a summer storm were certainly striking. It was the way she seemed to carry an invisible weight, one that curved her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. "You still mooning over the schoolmarm, Sheriff?" Hank Patterson slapped him on the back, nearly spilling Sam's untouched whiskey. "Just making sure she gets home safe," Sam replied, setting down his glass. "Town's busy tonight." "Town's always busy when the cattle drives finish," Hank said. "Though I reckon none of those cowboys stand a chance with Miss High and Mighty. Woman acts like she's got the Queen of England for a cousin." Sam frowned. "She's just private, Hank. Nothing wrong with that. Private's one thing. Peculiar's another." Hank lowered his voice. "Martha at the general store says she caught Miss Kincaid talking to herself last week. Just standing in the dry goods aisle, having a full conversation with thin air." "Martha should mind her own business," Sam said, standing up. "And so should you." He dropped a coin on the bar and walked out into the night. The air had cooled, bringing relief from the day's heat. Sam adjusted his hat and began his nightly patrol, though his thoughts remained with the schoolteacher who constantly looked over her shoulder. Felicity didn't sleep that night. She rarely did. Instead, she sat by the window of her small room above the schoolhouse, a single candle burning as she wrote in her journal. Writing kept the shadows at bay, at least temporarily. "I dreamt of Boston again. The fire. The screams. Father pulling me from the house as mother." She stopped writing, the memory too painful to commit to paper. Setting down her pen, Felicity gazed out at the moonlit street. Willow Creek slumbered peacefully, unaware of the darkness that had followed her from the east. A movement caught her eye, a tall figure walking slowly down the main street. Even in the dim light, she recognized Sheriff Wade's broad-shouldered silhouette. There was something reassuring about his presence, though she'd barely spoken to the man. Unlike the other men in town, he never stared too long or asked probing questions. He simply tipped his hat and continued on his way, respecting the walls she'd built around herself. For a moment, she considered what it might be like to trust someone again, to speak the truth about why she'd fled Boston. But the thought vanished as quickly as it had come. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the schoolhouse windows. Felicity had just finished writing the day's arithmetic problems on the blackboard when a knock at the door startled her. Sheriff Wade stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Morning, Miss Kincaid." "Sheriff," she acknowledged, immediately defensive. "Is something wrong?" "No, madam. Just thought you should know we're expecting some trouble in town today." He stepped inside, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden floor. "Got word that the Blackwater gang might be passing through." "Nothing to worry about, but I'd appreciate it if you'd keep the children inside during lunch hour." "Of course," Felicity replied, surprised by his consideration. "Thank you for the warning." Sam nodded, hesitating as if he wanted to say more. Instead, he simply returned his hat to his head. "Have a good day, Miss Kincaid." As he turned to leave, Felicity found herself speaking without thinking. "Sheriff Wade." He paused, looking back with curious blue eyes. I appreciate your diligence in keeping the town safe." A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Just doing my job, madam." After he left, Felicity remained standing at the blackboard, feeling strangely unsettled. Sheriff Wade was certainly not what she'd expected from a frontier lawman. Unlike the rough men who populated most of the town, he carried himself with a quiet dignity. His clothes, while practical, were always clean and well kept. And those eyes keen and observant, yet kind. She shook away the thoughts. Attachment was dangerous. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was something she could ill afford. Not with the shadows still lurking. The day passed without incident, though Felicity found herself frequently glancing out the window. By mid-afternoon, the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Not the Blackwater gang, but a small group of cowboys, likely from one of the nearby ranches. They rode past the schoolhouse, laughing and talking loudly, their horses kicking up dust. One of them noticed her watching and tipped his hat with exaggerated gallantry. Felicity quickly stepped away from the window, returning to her students. But the moment had been noticed. "Miss Kincaid," piped up 8-year-old Billy Thompson. "My pa says you're afraid of men. Is that true?" The classroom fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes stared up at her expectantly. "Your father is mistaken," Felicity replied calmly. "Now, please return to your reading." But the damage had been done. The question lingered in the air like smoke, reminding her that in a town this small, she would never truly be anonymous, never truly be safe. When school ended, Felicity remained behind, organizing books and cleaning the blackboard. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, making her skin prickle with unease. She worked quickly, wanting to be safely in her quarters before dark. The sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. Heavy boots on the wooden steps. A man's tread. "Miss Kincaid," Sheriff Wade's voice called from outside. "Are you still here?" Felicity released the breath she'd been holding. "Yes, Sheriff." "One moment." She opened the door to find him standing there, looking concerned. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Just checking in. Saw the light still on." He glanced past her into the schoolroom. "Those cowboys that rode through earlier, they didn't give you any trouble, did they?" "No," she said, surprised by his attentiveness. "They just passed by." Sam nodded, seemingly relieved. "Good. Some of those ranch hands can get rowdy." An awkward silence fell between them. Felicity found herself studying his face, the strong jawline softened by a neatly trimmed beard, the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter rather than hardship. "Well," he finally said, "I should let you get on with your evening." "Yes," Felicity agreed, though suddenly reluctant to be alone with her thoughts. "Thank you for checking on me." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, but then paused. "Miss Kincaid." "Yes." "The town's having a social on Saturday. Nothing fancy, just music and dancing at the town hall." He cleared his throat. "Thought you might like to know. Good way to meet folks." Before she could respond, he continued down the steps and walked away, leaving Felicity staring after him. A social. Dancing. The very idea made her stomach twist with anxiety. Yet a small part of her apart, she'd thought long dead, stirred with interest. That night, the shadows seemed to press closer than ever. Felicity sat upright in bed, a cold sweat coating her skin as the nightmare faded. In the dream, she'd been back in Boston, standing in her family's burning home. But this time, it wasn't her father who pulled her to safety. It was Sheriff Wade, his blue eyes piercing through the smoke. "You can't escape me, Felicity." A voice whispered from the darkest corner of her room. "You're not real," she said aloud, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You're a memory, nothing more." The shadow didn't reply, but she felt its presence like a physical weight. 3 months of running, and still it found her. Would she ever be free? Saturday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for the town social. Felicity spent the morning convincing herself she wouldn't attend, only to find herself standing before her small mirror that afternoon, pinning up her hair. The blue dress she wore was one of the few nice items she'd brought from Boston, save for special occasions that had never materialized in Willow Creek. "This is foolish," she told her reflection. What was she hoping to accomplish? She couldn't afford connections, couldn't risk questions about her past. Yet the prospect of another night alone with her thoughts was suddenly unbearable. The town hall was already bustling when she arrived. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the gathered townspeople. A small band played in one corner while children darted between the adults, laughing and playing games. Felicity hesitated at the entrance, fighting the urge to turn and flee. Then she saw Sheriff Wade across the room, deep in conversation with Mayor Collins. As if sensing her presence, he looked up and their eyes met. A smile spread across his face, and he excused himself from the mayor. "Miss Kincaid," he greeted her, approaching with an ease she envied. "I'm glad you decided to come." "It seemed impolite to refuse such a community gathering," she replied, though they both knew that hadn't stopped her from declining previous invitations. "Well, whatever the reason, it's nice to see you here." He gestured toward a table laden with food. "Mrs. Peterson's apple pie is worth the trip alone." Despite her nervousness, Felicity found herself smiling. "Is that a professional recommendation, Sheriff?" "Absolutely. Law enforcement requires thorough investigation of all local pie offerings." His eyes crinkled with humor, and for a moment, Felicity forgot to be afraid. The evening progressed with surprising ease. Felicity met several of her students' parents, exchanging pleasantries and discussing their children's progress. Throughout it all, Sheriff Wade remained nearby, not hovering but present, as if sensing her discomfort in crowds. When the band struck up a lively tune, couples took to the floor for dancing. Felicity watched from the sidelines, memories of elegant Boston ballrooms flickering through her mind. "Would you care to dance, Miss Kincaid?" She turned to find Sheriff Wade beside her, hand outstretched. The invitation hung between them like a delicate thread. It's been some time since I danced," she admitted. "Funny coincidence, it's been some time since I led a dance." His smile was gentle, without pressure. "We can be rusty together." Something in his expression, open, honest, without expectation, made her place her hand in his. "Very well, Sheriff. But I warn you, your toes may be at risk." His hand was warm and calloused as it closed around hers, and she allowed him to lead her onto the floor. The music washed over them as they joined the other dancers, and for the first time in months, Felicity felt the tightness in her chest begin to loosen. "You dance well for a man who claims to be out of practice," she observed as they moved through the steps. "I have many hidden talents, Miss Kincaid." His eyes held hers, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. "Though I suspect the same is true of you." The comment, innocent as it was, sent a chill through her. Hidden talents, hidden past, hidden truths. The shadows seemed to crowd the edges of her vision, a stark reminder of why she couldn't afford this closeness. "I should go," she said abruptly, pulling away. "It's getting late." Confusion and concern crossed his face. Felicity, it was the first time he'd used her given name, and it struck her like a physical blow. "Thank you for the dance, Sheriff Wade," she said formally, retreating through the crowd before he could respond. Outside, the night air cooled her flushed cheeks. Felicity walked quickly toward the schoolhouse, berating herself for the moment of weakness. She couldn't afford to let anyone close, especially not a man whose job was to uncover secrets. "Miss Kincaid, wait." She quickened her pace at the sound of Sheriff Wade's voice behind her, but his long strides soon caught up. "Did I offend you somehow?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "No," she replied, not looking at him. "I'm simply tired." "Felicity." He stopped walking, forcing her to either do the same or rudely continue on. She stopped, but kept her gaze fixed on the ground. "I don't know what you're running from, but I want you to know that you're safe here." The statement was so close to her thoughts that she looked up sharply. What makes you think I'm running from anything? His expression was gentle, without judgment. I've been sheriff here for 7 years. I've seen people coming and going, and I know the look of someone carrying a heavy burden. He paused. I'm not asking you to share it. Just know that not everyone is a threat. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. For a moment, Felicity wanted nothing more than to tell him everything about Boston, about the fire, about the shadows that pursued her. But the moment passed, and fear reasserted itself. Good night, Sheriff, she said quietly, turning away. Sam, he called after her. My name is Sam. She hesitated, then continued walking, feeling his eyes on her back until she reached the schoolhouse door. That night, the shadows were more persistent than ever. They whispered from the corners of her room, taunting her with memories she'd tried to bury. Felicity lit every lamp she owned, but still the darkness seemed to press against her windows, seeking entry. You'll never escape, the shadows seemed to say. And now you've drawn him into your nightmare. Leave me alone, she whispered fiercely. You aren't real. But even as she said it, Felicity knew that the danger was real enough. Not the shadows themselves, but the man who cast them, the man she'd fled Boston to escape. The man who had promised to find her, no matter how far she ran. Morning came with heavy clouds and the promise of rain. Felicity moved through her preparations for school mechanically, her mind still caught in the web of the previous night. She had just unlocked the schoolhouse door when a voice called her name. Miss Kincaid, Mrs. Henderson, the wife of the town's doctor, hurried toward her, face flushed with excitement. Good morning, Mrs. Henderson, Felicity greeted her. Is everything all right? Oh, more than all right. We've just had the most thrilling news. The older woman leaned closer, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The famous author Edward Blackwood is coming to Willow Creek. Can you believe it? He's on a tour of the West, gathering material for his next novel. Felicity's blood turned to ice. Edward Blackwood. The name echoed in her mind like a death knell. When? She managed to ask, her voice barely audible. Next week. He'll be staying at the hotel for several days. The mayor's planning a special reception. Mrs. Henderson beamed, oblivious to Felicity's distress. Isn't it exciting? A real celebrity in our little town. Felicity nodded mechanically, her mind racing. Edward Blackwood was coming to Willow Creek. After months of running, of looking over her shoulder, her worst fear was materializing. He had found her. Are you feeling unwell, dear? Mrs. Henderson asked, finally noticing Felicity's pallor. You've gone quite pale. I'm fine, Felicity lied. Just surprised by the news. If you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for class. She retreated into the schoolhouse, closing the door firmly behind her. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as she leaned against the solid wood, heart pounding in her chest. Edward Blackwood, celebrated author, darling of Boston society, and the man who had destroyed her family was coming to Willow Creek. She had 1 week. 1 week to decide whether to run again or to finally stop running and face the shadows that had haunted her for so long. The day passed in a blur of anxious thoughts. Felicity taught her lessons automatically, her mind elsewhere. The children seemed to sense her distraction, whispering among themselves when they thought she wasn't listening. After dismissing class, she remained at her desk, staring unseeingly at the stack of arithmetic papers before her. She needed to leave Willow Creek. Tonight, if possible. But where would she go? Her savings were nearly depleted, and the next town was 50 miles away. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Sheriff Wade Sam stood in the doorway, concern evident on his face. Afternoon, Miss Kincaid. Mind if I come in? She gestured for him to enter, quickly gathering her composure. What can I do for you, Sheriff? Heard from Mrs. Henderson that you seemed upset earlier. He removed his hat, holding it between his hands. Thought I'd check on you. Of course. News traveled fast in a town this size. I appreciate the concern, but I'm perfectly fine. He studied her for a moment, clearly unconvinced. Is it about Edward Blackwood coming to town? The direct question caught her off guard. Why would that upset me? I don't know, he admitted. But something's got you spooked, and the timing seems more than coincidental. Felicity stood, gathering papers with trembling hands. I assure you, Sheriff, my state of mind is not a matter for law enforcement. I'm not asking as the sheriff. He took a step closer, his voice softening. I'm asking as someone who cares about you." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Felicity stared at him, caught between the desire to trust and the fear that had driven her for so long. "You don't know me," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know enough." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I know you're kind to your students, even the difficult ones. I know you send part of your salary to the widow Johnson every month, though you think no one notices. I know you're afraid of something or someone, and you've been running for a long time." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "Please," she said, not entirely sure what she was asking for. "Let me help you, Felicity." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his beard, smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "Whatever trouble you're in, you don't have to face it alone." For a moment, she wavered. The weight of her secrets had grown so heavy, and the prospect of sharing them, of not being alone, was almost too tempting to resist. "I can't," she finally said, stepping away from him. "I'm sorry, but I can't." Disappointment flickered across his face, quickly masked. "All right, but my offer stands, whenever you're ready." He replaced his hat and turned to go, then paused at the door. "Just remember, running doesn't solve problems. It just postpones them." After he left, Felicity sank into her chair, overwhelmed by emotions she'd kept carefully contained for months. Sheriff Wade Sam had seen through her carefully constructed facade with unsettling ease. And worse, he'd made her want to lower her defenses, to trust again. But trust was what had destroyed her in the first place. That evening, as rain pattered against her window, Felicity began packing her meager belongings. She had enough money for a train ticket to Denver, though what she would do once she arrived was uncertain. Find another teaching position, perhaps, in a town even more remote than Willow Creek. A knock at her door made her jump. She quickly shoved the half-packed valise under her bed before opening the door a crack. The rain had soaked Sam Wade to the skin, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. "I need to speak with you," he said without preamble. "It's late, Sheriff. I just received a telegram from the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver." His eyes were serious. "It's about Edward Blackwood." Felicity's hand tightened on the doorframe. "What about him?" "He's wanted for questioning in connection with a suspicious fire in Boston last winter. A fire that killed 2 people and left a third badly injured." He watched her face carefully. "The Kincaid family fire." The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "You know," she whispered. "Not everything," he admitted, "but enough to understand why you might be afraid of him coming to Willow Creek." Felicity hesitated, then opened the door wider. "You'd better come in." The small room above the schoolhouse was sparsely furnished, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small bookshelf. Sam removed his wet hat and coat, hanging them on a hook by the door. "I was planning to leave tonight," Felicity admitted, gesturing to the valise partially visible under the bed. "Running again," he observed without judgment. "It's what I do best, apparently." She attempted a smile, but it faltered. "Please sit." They settled at the small table, the lamplight casting a warm glow between them. Outside, the rain continued to fall, wrapping the room in a cocoon of sound that felt strangely intimate. "I lived in Boston," Felicity began, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "My father was a professor of literature at Harvard. My mother was active in various charitable societies. We had a good life, comfortable, respectable." She paused, gathering her thoughts. 2 years ago, Edward Blackwood began attending my father's lectures. He was already becoming known as a writer, and my father was flattered by his interest. He invited Edward to our home for dinner, and soon he became a regular visitor. The memories rose like ghosts. Edward Blackwood seated at their dining table, charming her parents with his wit and literary knowledge, his eyes following her around the room. The books he brought her, his fingers lingering against hers as he passed them over. "He expressed interest in me," she continued, unable to meet Sam's gaze. "Romantic interest. At first, I was flattered. He was handsome, successful, seemingly kind. But as time went on, I began to feel uncomfortable with his attention. There was something beneath his polished exterior that frightened me." "What happened?" Sam asked quietly when she fell silent. "I refused his proposal of marriage," Felicity said, the words bitter on her tongue. "He didn't take it well. He became obsessive, sending letters, appearing at places he knew I would be." My father finally confronted him, told him to stay away from our family. She took a shaky breath. A week later, our house caught fire in the middle of the night. My mother never made it out. My father managed to get me to safety, but he'd inhaled too much smoke trying to reach my mother. He died 3 days later in the hospital. Sam's face had hardened into grim lines. And Blackwood. The fire was ruled an accident. There was no evidence linking him to it. Only my suspicions. Felicity looked up, meeting Sam's eyes directly. But the night after my father's funeral, Edward came to see me at my aunt's house where I was staying. He told me that I belonged to him, that no one would keep us apart. He said that my parents had paid the price for interfering, and others would too if I didn't come to my senses. So you ran? Sam concluded. Yes, that night. I took what money I had and headed west. A bitter laugh escaped her. I thought I'd gone far enough. I thought he'd forgotten about me. But now he's coming here, Sam said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Following your trail. Felicity nodded, exhaustion washing over her. Now you understand why I have to leave. No. The single word was firm, commanding. Running isn't the answer, Felicity. It never is. What alternative do I have? I can't prove he set the fire. I can't prove he threatened me. It would be my word against his. And he's a celebrated author, while I'm just a schoolteacher with a nervous disposition. Sam leaned forward, his eyes intense. The U.S. Marshal's telegram mentioned new evidence in the case. Blackwood isn't just coming west on a book tour he's running too, staying one step ahead of the law. Hope flickered briefly in Felicity's chest, then died. Even so, I can't face him. Not again. You won't have to face him alone. Sam's hand moved across the table to cover hers. I'll be with you. The touch of his skin against hers sent warmth spreading up her arm. For a moment, Felicity allowed herself to imagine it standing her ground, confronting the man who had destroyed her life, with Sam Wade at her side. Why would you risk yourself for me? She asked, genuinely puzzled. You barely know me. Something flickered in his eyes, determination, certainly, but also something deeper, something that made her breath catch. I know enough. He repeated his words from earlier. I know that you've been carrying this burden alone for too long. I know that you deserve justice, not a life spent looking over your shoulder. A tear slipped down Felicity's cheek. I'm so tired of being afraid, she admitted. Then let's put an end to it. His hand tightened around hers. Together. For the first time in 2 years, Felicity felt something other than fear when thinking of Edward Blackwood. She felt anger. And beneath the anger, a steely determination that surprised her with its strength. What do you propose? She asked. A slow smile spread across Sam's face, the smile of a man with a plan. First, we need to send a telegram to Marshal Jenkins in Denver. Then, we prepare a proper welcome for Mr. Blackwood. That night, Felicity slept peacefully for the first time in months. No shadows whispered from the corners. No nightmares jolted her awake. Instead, she dreamed of standing in sunlight, warm and unafraid. The days that followed were filled with purpose. Sam sent telegrams to Denver and Boston, gathering information about Edward Blackwood's movements and the investigation into the fire. Felicity continued teaching, drawing strength from the routine and from the knowledge that she was no longer alone in her struggle. Sam became a constant presence, checking on her throughout the day, walking her home in the evenings. They really talked about their lives, their hopes, their fears. Felicity learned that Sam had come west after the Civil War, seeking a fresh start away from the bloodshed he'd witnessed as a young soldier. He told her about his dream of someday having a ranch of his own, raising horses rather than enforcing the law. In return, she shared stories of her childhood in Boston, of her parents' love for each other and for her, of her passion for teaching. With each conversation, the connection between them deepened, transcending their initial roles as sheriff and schoolteacher, protector and protected. 3 days before Blackwood's scheduled arrival, Sam appeared at the schoolhouse after classes had ended, excitement evident in his stride. We've got him, Felicity, he announced, waving a telegram. Marshal Jenkins found a witness, a former servant in the Blackwood household, who overheard him threatening your family the day before the fire. And there's more financial records showing he purchased coal oil that same day. Felicity stared at him, hardly daring to believe. They can arrest him? They've issued a warrant. Jenkins will be arriving on the same train as Blackwood, ready to take him into custody. Sam's face softened. "It's almost over, Felicity. You'll be free." The relief was so overwhelming that her knees nearly buckled. Sam was at her side instantly, strong arms supporting her, leading her to a chair. "I never thought this day would come," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "I thought I'd be running forever. Not anymore." Sam knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "When this is over, you can decide what you want. Stay in Willow Creek, return to Boston, go somewhere new. The choice will be yours." Felicity looked at him, this man who had become her champion, her confidant, her friend. The thought of leaving him created an ache in her chest she hadn't anticipated. "And if I choose to stay?" she asked softly. Something flickered in his eyes, hope, longing, uncertainty. "Then I'd be the happiest man in Wyoming territory," he said simply. The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. Slowly, giving him time to pull away, Felicity leaned forward until their foreheads touched. They stayed that way for a long moment, sharing breath, sharing space, the promise of something more hovering between them. "I should go," Sam finally said, though he made no move to leave. "Mayor Collins is expecting me for dinner to discuss security arrangements for Blackwood's visit." "Of course." Felicity straightened, composing herself. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." He stood, reluctantly releasing her hands. At the door, he paused, looking back at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "Sleep well, Felicity." "Good night, Sam." After he left, Felicity remained seated, her mind whirling with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider until now. A future without fear. A life in Willow Creek. A chance at happiness with a man who looked at her as if she were something precious. For the first time in 2 years, Felicity Kincaid dared to hope. The day of Edward Blackwood's arrival dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the promise of autumn. Felicity canceled classes, unable to focus on teaching with the knowledge that by afternoon, the man who had haunted her nightmares would be in Willow Creek. Sam came to escort her to breakfast at the hotel, his sheriff's badge polished to a shine, his manner calm but alert. Marshal Jenkins arrived on the early train, he told her as they walked. "He's waiting at my office. The plan is set. Blackwood won't know what's happening until it's too late." "And my role?" Felicity asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "You don't have to do anything," Sam assured her. "Just stay in my office with Deputy Franklin. You won't have to see Blackwood at all." But even as he said it, they both knew it wasn't true. After 2 years of running, of looking over her shoulder, Felicity needed to face her tormentor, needed to see justice done with her own eyes. "I want to be there," she said firmly. "When you arrest him." Sam studied her face, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you sure? It could be dangerous if he realizes you're here." "I'm sure." Felicity squared her shoulders. "I'm done hiding, Sam." Pride flashed across his face, quickly followed by worry. "All right, but you stay behind me at all times. And if I tell you to run, you run. Promise me." "I promise." The town was buzzing with excitement by mid-morning. Edward Blackwood's impending visit had been announced in the Willow Creek Gazette, and many of the townsfolk had gathered at the train station to catch a glimpse of the famous author. Felicity watched from the window of Sam's office, her heart pounding as the train whistle sounded in the distance. "You don't have to do this," Sam said again, standing beside her. "Marshal Jenkins can handle the arrest." "I know." Felicity turned to him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "But I need to see his face when he realizes he didn't win. That he didn't break me." Sam's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "You're the strongest person I know, Felicity Kincaid." The moment was interrupted by Marshal Jenkins entering the office, a weathered man with keen eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Train's coming in, Sheriff. Best get in position." The plan was simple. Mayor Collins would greet Blackwood at the station and escort him to the hotel, where a small reception had been arranged. Sam and Marshal Jenkins would approach him there, away from the crowd at the station, and make the arrest with minimal fuss. Felicity would remain out of sight until the last moment, a witness to justice rather than a participant. They took their positions in the hotel lobby, Sam and Marshal Jenkins posing as admirers waiting to meet the famous author. Felicity stood near the back in trance, partially hidden by a large potted plant, her heart racing as voices approached from outside. And then he was there, Edward Blackwood, stepping into the hotel with the confident stride of a man accustomed to admiration. He was just as Felicity remembered, tall and handsome, with silver-streaked dark hair and the cultivated charm that had so impressed Boston society. Mayor Collins walked beside him, gesturing animatedly as he spoke of the town's honor at hosting such a distinguished visitor. Blackwood smiled and nodded, playing his role perfectly. But Felicity knew the truth behind that polished facade, the obsession, the rage, the capacity for destruction that had cost her everything. Sam caught her eye across the lobby, a silent question in his gaze. Felicity nodded slightly, confirming that this was indeed the man. Sam turned to Marshall Jenkins, who gave an equally subtle nod. They approached Blackwood smoothly, professionally, Sam extending his hand in greeting. "Mr. Blackwood, welcome to Willow Creek. I'm Sheriff Wade." Blackwood shook his hand, smiling. "A pleasure, Sheriff. I've heard your town is quite the growing community." "It is indeed." Sam's voice remained pleasant, but Felicity saw his posture shift subtly, ready for any reaction. "This is U.S. Marshal Jenkins." A flicker of unease crossed Blackwood's face, quickly masked. "Marshal, I wasn't aware my humble visit warranted federal attention." "It's not your visit that interests me, Mr. Blackwood." Jenkins's voice was hard as steel. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of arson and murder in Boston, Massachusetts." The change in Blackwood was instantaneous. His charming smile vanished, replaced by cold calculation. His eyes darted around the lobby, seeking an escape route. "This is absurd," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I've committed no crime." "We have witnesses, Blackwood," Jenkins said, "and evidence. It's over." For a moment, it seemed Blackwood would surrender peacefully. Then his gaze landed on Felicity, partially visible behind the potted plant. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by a rage so pure it transformed his handsome features into something monstrous. "You," he snarled, lunging toward her. Sam moved with surprising speed, intercepting Blackwood before he could take 3 steps. The two men crashed into a nearby table, sending it toppling as they grappled. Blackwood was strong, fueled by fury, but Sam was stronger, his movements controlled and precise. Within moments, Sam had Blackwood face down on the floor, one knee in his back as he secured handcuffs around the man's wrists. Marshal Jenkins stood ready, his hand on his holstpin, though he hadn't drawn it. "Edward Blackwood, you're under arrest for the murders of Margaret and James Kincaid," Sam announced, his voice carrying through the now silent lobby. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." Blackwood twisted his head, his eyes finding Felicity despite his awkward position. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you've won, but you'll never be free of me." "Never." Felicity stepped forward, emerging fully from her hiding place. For 2 years, this man had been the specter haunting her dreams, the shadow dogging her steps. She had run from him, feared him, allowed him to control her life even in absence. "No more." "You're wrong, Edward," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It is over. You have no power over me anymore." The truth of it washed through her like a cleansing rain. The shadows that had followed her for so long began to dissolve in the light of justice, in the strength she'd found in Willow Creek, in the unwavering support of the man who now pulled Blackwood to his feet. "Get him out of here," Sam told Jenkins, never taking his eyes off Felicity. As Marshal Jenkins led the protesting Blackwood away, Sam crossed to Felicity, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, surprised to find it was true. "I really am." The crowd that had gathered during the commotion began to disperse, murmuring excitedly about the dramatic turn of events. Mayor Collins apologized profusely for the disruption, seemingly more concerned about the town's reputation than the fact that a murderer had been in their midst. But Felicity barely heard him. She was looking at Sam, at the pride in his eyes, the relief in his smile, the promise of something more hovering between them. "It's really over," she whispered, the full weight of it finally sinking in. "It is," Sam confirmed, reaching for her hand. "You're free, Felicity." Freedom. The word resonated within her, sweet and potent. Freedom from fear, from running, from looking over her shoulder. Freedom to build a life, to put down roots, to open her heart. "What now?" she asked, not just of the immediate future, but of all the possibilities stretching before her. Sam's hand tightened around hers. "Now," he said softly, "we begin." The weeks that followed Blackwood's arrest brought changes to Willow Creek and to Felicity. The town buzzed with the story, embellishing it with each retelling until Felicity scarcely recognized herself in the tales of the brave schoolteacher who had helped capture a notorious criminal. She bore the attention with as much grace as she could, grateful that at least the true nature of her connection to Blackwood remained private. Sam ensured that. He protected her not just physically, but in all the ways that mattered, shielding her from prying questions, respecting her need for privacy, giving her space to heal while never straying too far. Marshal Jenkins returned to Denver with Blackwood in custody, promising to keep them informed of the case's progress. The evidence against Blackwood was substantial, he assured them. Justice would be served. Slowly, life in Willow Creek returned to normal. Felicity resumed teaching, finding new joy in the simple routine. The shadows that had haunted her began to fade, replaced by a sense of security she had thought lost forever. And then there was Sam. Their relationship evolved naturally, without rush or pressure. Evening walks after school. Sunday dinners at the hotel. Conversations that stretched long into the night, covering everything from books to dreams to their hopes for the future. The first time he kissed her was on a crisp October evening, as they stood on the porch of the schoolhouse after one of their walks. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, a perfect backdrop for the moment when Sam finally gathered his courage. "Felicity," he said, his voice lower than usual, "I've been wanting to do this for a long time." She smiled up at him, heart racing with anticipation. "What's stopping you?" His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle, as if she were made of something precious. "Nothing at all," he murmured, and then his lips were on hers, warm and certain. The kiss was everything Felicity had imagined, and more tender yet passionate, a promise and a fulfillment all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Felicity Kincaid," he whispered. "Have been since the first time I saw you looking over your shoulder at shadows only you could see." Tears pricked at her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "And I love you, Samuel Wade. You who lit a fire in me when I thought all warmth had gone out of the world." He kissed her again, sealing the declaration with actions where words fell short. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Felicity knew with absolute certainty that her decision to stay in Willow Creek had been the right one. Word came from Denver in November that Edward Blackwood had been convicted of the murders of Margaret and James Kincaid. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, never again free to threaten Felicity or anyone else. The news brought final closure to a chapter of her life that had been defined by loss and fear. That evening, Sam found her at the small cemetery on the edge of town, standing before two fresh markers she had commissioned once she knew she would be staying in Willow Creek. Margaret Kincaid, beloved mother James Kincaid, beloved father. Not graves her parents were buried in Boston, but memorials, a way to honor them in the place she now called home. "They would be proud of you," Sam said, coming to stand beside her. "Of your courage, your resilience." Felicity leaned into his solid warmth. "I hope so." She traced her fingers over the carved names. "I wish you could have known them. My father would have liked you a man of action who also appreciates literature." "And your mother?" A smile touched Felicity's lips. "She would have taken one look at the way you gaze at me and declared you hopelessly in love. She would have been right." Sam's arm circled her waist, drawing her closer. "I am hopelessly, completely in love with you, Felicity." The December snow fell softly outside the church as Felicity stood before the mirror in the small antechamber, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Her wedding gown was simple but elegant, ordered from Denver with Mrs. Henderson's enthusiastic assistance. Her hair was adorned with small white flowers, and her cheeks were flushed with happiness rather than fear. A knock at the door preceded Mrs. Henderson herself, beaming with maternal pride. "It's time, dear. Are you ready?" Felicity took a deep breath, smoothing her hands over the ivory satin of her dress. "I am." The church was filled with the people of Willow Creek, her students and their families, shopkeepers and ranchers, all the souls who had become her community over the past 8 months. They rose as the music began, turning to watch her walk down the aisle alone. But Felicity didn't feel alone. With each step towards Sam, who waited for her at the altar with wonder in his eyes, she felt accompanied by all those who had loved her parents, whose memory she carried always, the townspeople who had welcomed her, and most of all, the man who had taught her to stop running and start living. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the hushed church. "We are gathered here today to join Samuel James Wade and Felicity and Kincaid in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to love and support each other through whatever life might bring. When Sam slipped the gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady, but his eyes were bright with emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss the bride." Sam's kiss was gentle, reverent, a sealed promise before their community. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Wade, the applause was deafening, a celebration not just of their union, but of the journey that had brought them together. The reception at the town hall lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than the entire town could possibly consume. Felicity moved through it all in a happy daze, scarcely able to believe that this joy was hers to claim. "Happy, Mrs. Wade?" Sam asked as they swayed together for their first dance as husband and wife. "Completely," she confirmed, resting her head against his chest. "And you, Mr. Wade?" "I've never been happier." His arms tightened around her. "Though I suspect even greater happiness awaits us." Later that night, as snow continued to fall outside their new home, a small but comfortable house on the edge of town that Sam had been secretly renovating for months, they lay together in the warm darkness, talking of dreams and plans for their shared future. "I've been thinking," Sam said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, "about leaving the sheriff's office." Felicity propped herself up on one elbow, surprised. "Really? But you love your work." "I do," he acknowledged. "But I love you more. And that ranch I've always dreamed of." "Well, Hank Patterson's place just north of town is for sale. Good land, sturdy house, plenty of room for horses. And for a family, someday." The suggestion sent a thrill through Felicity. A family of their own children with Sam's blue eyes and steady nature. It was a future she hadn't dared to imagine until now. "You'd really leave law enforcement?" she asked. "For me." "For us," he corrected gently. "For the life we could build together. Deputy Franklin is more than ready to step up as sheriff. And I'm ready for something new." Felicity leaned down to kiss him, pouring all her love and hope into the gesture. "Then yes," she whispered against his lips. "Let's build that life together." Spring came to Wyoming with a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. The Wade Ranch, as it was now known throughout the county, was coming along nicely. Sam had thrown himself into the work with characteristic dedication, transforming the neglected property into a thriving horse farm. Felicity continued teaching at the schoolhouse in town, riding to and from the ranch each day on a gentle mare that had been Sam's wedding gift to her. Their life together settled into a rhythm that satisfied them, both hard work during the day, quiet evenings by the fire, nights spent in each other's arms. The shadows that had once haunted Felicity faded entirely, replaced by the warm light of love and security. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple, Felicity turned to her husband with news she'd been savoring all day. "Sam," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The wonder that bloomed on his face was something she would remember all her days, pure joy mingled with awe and a fierce protectiveness that made her heart swell. "A baby," he repeated, voice thick with emotion. "Our baby. Due in November, according to Dr. Henderson." Felicity couldn't stop smiling. "Just in time for our first anniversary." Sam pulled her into his lap, cradling her as if she were made of glass. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Both of you." As twilight deepened around them, Felicity Kincaid Wade looked out at the land that had become her home, at the life she had built from the ashes of tragedy. The woman who had lived with shadows behind her had found her way into the light, guided by a love that burned steady and true. And that fire, she knew with absolute certainty, would never go out. 5 years later, the winter storm howled outside, but inside the Wade Ranch house, all was warmth and light. Felicity moved through the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on a birthday cake, while keeping an eye on the children playing in the adjacent sitting room. James, nearly 4 years old now, was building a precarious tower of wooden blocks while his little sister Margaret, just past her 2nd birthday, watched with solemn blue eyes that were the image of her father's. "Mama, look," James called proudly as the tower reached his shoulder. "Very impressive, sweetheart," Felicity praised him. "Be careful it doesn't fall on your sister." As if summoned by her words, the tower swayed and collapsed with a clatter, sending Margaret into peals of delighted laughter. James, after a moment of disappointment, joined in her mirth, already gathering blocks for a new attempt. The sound of stomping boots on the porch announced Sam's return from the barn, where he'd been tending to a mare about to foal. He entered in a swirl of cold air and snowflakes, his cheeks ruddy from the wind. "Papa!" The children abandoned their blocks and rushed to him, James throwing his arms around Sam's legs while Margaret raised her arms in the universal request to be lifted. Sam obliged, swinging his daughter up into a hug before bending to ruffle James's dark hair. "How are my favorite people on this blustery day?" "We're making a cake for your birthday," James announced, tugging his father toward the kitchen. "Mama let me stir." "Did she now?" Sam raised an eyebrow at Felicity, who smiled innocently. "No wonder it smells so delicious in here." He crossed to where she stood by the stove and pressed a kiss to her temple, one arm still holding Margaret while the other slipped around Felicity's waist. "Hello, beautiful. Hello yourself, birthday boy." She turned in his embrace, rising on tiptoe to kiss him properly. "How's Daisy doing?" "Getting close. I've set up a cot in the stable. I'll sleep out there tonight to keep an eye on her." Felicity frowned. "In this weather?" "Sam, you'll freeze." "I'll be fine," he assured her. "The stove in the tack room keeps it plenty warm. Besides, this foal is special, the first of our new breeding line. I want to make sure everything goes smoothly." The Wade Ranch had flourished under Sam's care, becoming known throughout the territory for its quality horses. What had begun as a dream shared on their wedding night had become a thriving reality, supporting their growing family in a way that brought Sam more satisfaction than his years as sheriff ever had. Felicity still taught at the schoolhouse 3 days a week, having arranged for a younger teacher to take the other 2 days. The arrangement allowed her to pursue her passion for education while still having ample time with her children and to help with the ranch. "At least come have your birthday dinner and cake before you exile yourself to the barn," she said, checking the roast in the oven. "Everything's almost ready." Dinner was a joyful affair, with James chattering about his latest adventures and Margaret solemnly offering her father bites from her own plate as a special birthday gift. After the meal, Felicity brought out the cake, alight with candles. "Make a wish, Papa," James urged as Sam prepared to blow them out. Sam looked around the table at his family, at James with his mother's honey-brown hair and quick intelligence, at little Margaret with her father's steady gaze and quiet strength, at Felicity, whose love had transformed his life in ways he was still discovering. "I already have everything I could wish for," he said, his voice husky with emotion. But he closed his eyes and blew out the candles anyway, because some traditions were too important to skip, and because there was always room for more joy, more love, more life. Later, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Felicity helped Sam gather what he would need for his night in the barn. She packed extra blankets, a thermos of coffee, and a slice of cake wrapped carefully in waxed paper. "You're sure I can't convince you to wait until morning?" she asked, handing him the bundle. "The storm's getting worse." "All the more reason to be with Daisy now," Sam said, pulling on his heavy coat. "Don't worry, I've weathered worse than this." Felicity sighed, recognizing the determination in his voice. "At least take the shotgun." "Just in case." Sam chuckled, but did as she asked, retrieving the weapon from its cabinet. "Always the worrier. Always the protector," she countered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Happy birthday, my love. Come back to me at first light. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." He kissed her once more, lingering a moment. "I love you, Felicity Wade." "And I love you, Samuel Wade." After he'd gone, Felicity moved through the house, banking the fire and checking on the sleeping children before retiring to her own bed. The empty space beside her was a reminder of how accustomed she'd grown to Sam's presence, his warmth, the steady sound of his breathing in the night. 5 years of marriage had only deepened her love for him. They had weathered challenges together, difficult fallings, a fire that had nearly claimed the barn 2 summers ago, James's bout with pneumonia last winter, and had emerged stronger for each trial. The shadows that had once haunted Felicity were long gone, replaced by a certainty that whatever came, they would face it together. She drifted to sleep with the storm howling outside, secure in the knowledge that morning would bring Sam back to her, as it always did. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Felicity woke early, anticipation quickening her movements as she dressed and prepared breakfast. Sam would be hungry after his night in the barn, especially if Daisy had foaled. The children were still sleeping as she pulled on her coat and boots and made her way across the snow-covered yard to the stable. The morning was blindingly bright, sunlight reflecting off fresh snow that glittered like diamond dust. Felicity's heart lifted at the sight of smoke rising from the stable's chimney. Sam must be awake already, perhaps tending to a new foal. She quickened her pace, eager to share in the excitement of a successful birth. The stable was warm and fragrant with the scents of hay and horses. Felicity moved quietly past the stalls, nodding to the occupants who nickered in greeting. At the far end, in the largest stall reserved for birthing, she found what she was looking for, and the sight made her pause in the doorway, unwilling to disturb the scene before her. Sam sat on a bale of hay, his back against the wall, fast asleep. Curled in his lap was a tiny foal, its coat still damp in places, spindly legs tucked beneath it. Beside them, Daisy stood watchful but relaxed, occasionally lowering her head to nuzzle her offspring. As if sensing Felicity's presence, Sam's eyes opened. A slow smile spread across his face, warming her from the inside out. "Come meet our new arrival," he said softly, careful not to disturb the sleeping foal. Born just before midnight. A filly strong and perfect. Felicity entered the stall, kneeling beside them to gently stroke the foal's velvet muzzle. "She's beautiful, Sam. I thought we might call her Phoenix," he suggested. Rising from the ashes of all we've overcome. The name resonated with Felicity, carrying echoes of her own journey from darkness into light. "It's perfect." The foal stirred, blinking large liquid eyes at them before struggling to stand on wobbly legs. Sam helped steady her, his hands gentle and sure as he guided the newborn to her mother. Daisy nickered softly as her daughter found her way to breakfast, instinct taking over. "Life finds a way," Sam murmured, coming to stand beside Felicity, his arms slipping around her waist. "No matter the storm, no matter the challenge." Felicity leaned into him, grateful beyond words for this man who had taught her to believe in second chances, in new beginnings, in love that burns steady and true. "The children will be waking soon," she said. "They'll be so excited to meet Phoenix." "Let's bring them out after breakfast," Sam suggested. "Make it a family affair." Family. The word still filled Felicity with wonder and gratitude. From the ashes of tragedy, she had found not just survival, but joy, a husband who cherished her, children who delighted her, a community that supported her, and a future bright with promise. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, the rising sun casting their shadows long across the pristine snow, Felicity thought of how far she had come from the frightened woman who had arrived in Willow Creek 6 years ago, constantly looking over her shoulder at shadows only she could see. Sam had lit a fire in her heart, that day, a fire of courage, of hope, of love so powerful it had banished all darkness. And as they stepped into their home, greeted by the excited voices of their children, Felicity knew with absolute certainty that this fire would never go out. It would burn eternal, lighting their way through whatever joys and sorrows life might bring, illuminating a future they would build together, one day at a time, until the end of their days.